On Thanksgiving, my sister saw my $12 million and my family demanded half. They had to regret it. I always thought I was an ordinary girl in an ordinary family. I wasn't the favorite child, but I didn't feel I was treated badly either. At least not before everything changed, not before my sister was born. My life, or what I remembered as life, was normal. It smelled of cookies baking on Sundays and my mother's perfume before she went out to dinner with my father. I was AITA, and at 7 years old, the world was predictable. Until that night. I remember waking up to frantic pounding on my bedroom door. It wasn't my mother's gentle knock, it was a series of sharp, desperate bangs. It was my Aunt Jimena, her face as pale as paper. "AITA, my sweet girl, you have to pack your things. Your mom is in the hospital." In my 7-year-old mind, hospital meant accidents, pain, all those terrible things the commercials on TV tell you can happen. But the real horror wasn't the accident, it wasn't even the loss. The horror was what came after. My sister, Noemi, was born that night, almost 2 months early. I didn't understand what premature meant, I only understood that it was serious. Because suddenly, every whispered conversation in the house revolved around that tiny baby in a glass box. The following weeks were a blur. I stayed at my Aunt Jimena's house, listening to the adults talk in low voices about Noemi's condition, about her lungs, about the danger. They didn't let me visit her much. I only saw my mother a couple of times at the hospital, and each time her gaze was lost, distant. She only ever said one thing to me. "Behave, AITA. Mommy is very busy." So, I learned to become invisible. When Noemi finally came home, things became even more suffocating. The house that once smelled of baking cookies now reeked of isopropyl alcohol. Hand sanitizer by every door, antibacterial wipes, disinfectant sprays. It was such a pervasive smell that, I swear, sometimes I could smell it in my dreams. My mother transformed. She became obsessed with keeping Noemi safe. She cleaned every surface 3-4 times a day. She monitored the temperature of Noemi's room every hour. She washed her hands so frequently that her skin cracked and bled. But what hurt me wasn't the strict rules, it was the fact that I no longer belonged in my own home. I became the #1 biological threat. The slightest sign of illness, a sneeze from dust, a slight cough in the morning, and I was immediately sent to my grandmother's house. Or worse, I was shooed out of a room with my mother's terrified gaze, looking at me as if I were a walking plague. "AITA, cover your mouth," she would shout if I breathed too close to the hallway that led to Noemi's room. At first, I thought it was a blessing. My grandmother, Remedios, was kind. Her house smelled of cinnamon and old wood. She always let me help her bake, and there I didn't have to whisper every word or tiptoe around like an intruder. But over time, I realized the painful truth. I wasn't sent to grandma's because my mother worried about me or wanted me to have fun. I was sent away because I was a risk, a nuisance, a bag of germs that could hurt the only person who mattered now. I really tried, to get her attention back, but for them, only Noemi existed. Everything I did was invisible. Everything Noemi did was a miracle. If Noemi managed to sleep for 3 hours straight, it was cause for celebration. If I got a perfect score on a test at school, my mother barely looked up from Noemi's medication list. I learned to live like that. I learned not to expect anything. I learned that in this family, I was the resident ghost, and Noemi was the sun. And everyone revolved around her while I faded into the shadows. Growing up in Noemi's shadow wasn't just about feeling ignored, it was an active education in my own irrelevance. While Noemi was wrapped in cotton wool, treated like a priceless piece of porcelain, I was functional. I was the one who had to get good grades, not cause trouble, and above all, stay healthy so as not to put my sister at risk. My mother justified everything with Noemi's fragility. "Noemi is delicate, AITA," she would tell me, almost like a threat. "You're strong, you can handle it. Handling it meant handling everything alone. At 10, I won the school science fair. I built a working model of a volcano that erupted spectacularly with baking soda and vinegar. I was so proud. I came home with my first place blue ribbon. My mother was in the kitchen preparing a special porridge for Noemi. "Mom, look. I won first place," I said, holding up the ribbon. "Oh, that's nice, Aitana," she said without turning around. "That's good. Now, please, put that in the garage. I don't want the dust from the cardboard to trigger your sister's allergies." She didn't even look at it. The volcano ended up in a damp corner of the garage next to the old tires, and we never spoke of it again. 2 months later, Noemi, who was 3, made a drawing with colored scribbles. My father framed it and hung it in the main living room, calling it our little artist's first masterpiece. But the blow that shattered the last shred of hope in me came when I turned 12. I had discovered the piano. I loved it. It was something I could do alone, something I could pour all my frustration and loneliness into. I practiced for a whole year for the school's talent show. It was a complicated piece, a Chopin prelude, I think. My fingers ached, but I was obsessed. I dreamed of the moment my parents would see me on stage. I dreamed of their applause. The day of the recital arrived. I was nervous but excited. And then my mother called me into the kitchen. "Aitana," she said in that tense voice I knew so well, "your father and I won't be able to make it tonight." My heart stopped. What? Why? "But it's today. Your sister has a fever," she said, her voice filled with a concern she had never, ever used with me. I ran to Noemi's room. She was in her bed watching TV, looking perfectly normal. "Do you feel sick?" I asked her. "I'm hot," she said with a pout. I looked at the thermometer on her nightstand. It read 37.5 degrees Celsius 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit. It was barely a fever. It was the kind of fever any child gets dozens of times a year. "But she barely has a fever," I pleaded with my mother. "The recital is only an hour." "You don't understand," she snapped. "A small fever for you could be pneumonia for her. We can't risk it. You'll have to understand." That night, I put on my dress. My Aunt Jimena took me, and I played the piano. I played with all my heart, every note perfect. When I finished, there was applause from the other parents, from the teachers. But when I looked out at the audience, the 2 chairs I had saved in the front row were empty. I felt completely alone in a crowded auditorium. 2 weeks later, Noemi, who had started taking flute lessons, had her first recital. She played "Mary Had a Little Lamb." She shrieked on the high notes and skipped half the song. It lasted, being generous, 15 minutes. The entire family was there. My parents, my grandparents from both sides, my Aunt Jimena. They applauded as if Mozart had come back to life. They took her out for pizza and ice cream. They talked about her natural talent for weeks. That was the moment I stopped trying. I stopped seeking their approval. I understood that I was never going to win. It didn't matter what I did, it would never be enough. My success was an inconvenience. Noemi's mere attempt was a triumph. So I stopped playing their game. If they weren't going to see me, I would make sure to build something so big they couldn't ignore it. Every time I sneezed, every time my nose was red from the cold, it was my one-way ticket to my Grandma Remediosa's house. My mother would drop me off at the door with a bag of clothes and a cautionary look as if she were putting me in quarantine. "Call me if Aitana gets a fever," she'd tell my grandmother, and then she'd rush back home to her sterile fortress. But for me, that door was the entrance to the only place where I felt I could breathe. Grandma Remediosa's house was the opposite of mine. Mine was silent, tense, and smelled of bleach. My grandmother's was full of life, the ticking of 100 antique clocks, the smell of cinnamon, anise, and spiced pot coffee, and the chaotic clutter of a life well lived. My grandmother was a woman who had seen the world, and in her house, she kept the treasures from those journeys. Small wooden boxes filled with mysteries. "Come, my child," she said one afternoon as I stared at an old tortoiseshell hair comb. "Do you know what this is?" I shook my head. "This is a Victorian piece. Made by hand. Look at these engravings," she whispered, running her wrinkled finger over the design. "No machine can do this. And do you see that tiny mark near the clasp?" I squinted. It was almost invisible. "That's the jeweler's mark, the hallmark. Things like this, AITA, are worth more than people think. Not because of the gold, but because of the story they tell." I held the comb in my hands. I felt its weight, the coolness of the metal. It was the first time I understood that some things had a value that wasn't visible at first glance. While my mother saw me as a bag of germs, my grandmother saw me as an apprentice. We spent hours and hours in her kitchen. She would bring out her treasures. She taught me to recognize real gold by its weight in the palm of my hand. She taught me to distinguish a natural pearl from a synthetic one just by rubbing it gently against my teeth. She taught me to determine the rarity of a gem by the way it reflected light, not by how much it sparkled. "People are fooled by the sparkle, my child," she would say, holding a fake diamond next to a real one. "The sparkle is cheap. Look for the fire, look for the depth." I was fascinated. I absorbed everything. But when I returned to my own house, none of it mattered. One day, Grandma Remedios came to visit. It was one of the few times she did. My mother always made excuses about the risks to Noemi. I was in the living room doing my homework while Noemi, who was about 5 or 6 by then, was whining on the couch because she didn't want to eat her vegetables. My mother was trying to spoon-feed her. "Just one more little spoonful, my love, please." My Grandma Remedios watched her from the doorway. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "You're making a mistake," my grandmother said, her voice calm but firm. My mother tensed up. "Excuse me?" "You're breaking that girl," my grandmother said, nodding her chin towards me. "And you're turning the other one into a helpless child. Noemi isn't made of glass, and AITA isn't invisible." The silence in the room was so thick I could almost touch it. My mother stood up slowly, her face red. "Stay out of this, Mom. You don't understand. You weren't in that hospital for weeks. You don't know what it's like to have a fragile child." "I know what it's like to have 2 daughters," my grandmother replied. "And you're sacrificing one for the other. You're going to regret this." My mother escorted her to the door and told her not to come back if she was going to bring that negativity into her house. That night, I felt guilty, but I also felt a spark of validation. Someone else saw it. I wasn't crazy. From that day on, I knew my grandmother was my only ally, and I also knew I had to get out of that house. My mother was right about one thing. I was strong. And I would use that strength to build my own way out, brick by brick, far from my sister's shadow. High school was my training ground for invisibility. I became an expert. I learned to move through the house without making a sound, to prepare my own food, to do my own laundry. My parents were so consumed by Noemi's life, her dance classes, her doctor's appointments for imaginary allergies, her teenage dramas, that I basically raised myself. But while they were busy applauding Noemi's every sneeze, I was busy building my arsenal. I buried myself in books. The library was my second home, and my grandmother Remedios was my only confidant. I stopped seeking my parents' approval and started seeking something more tangible, a scholarship. I knew it was my only way out. I couldn't depend on them to pay for college, they barely noticed I was in my senior year of high school. I joined every club, the debate team, the school newspaper. I worked part-time at a small cafe to save money and studied for the SAT, the college entrance exam, as if my life depended on it. Because it did. I didn't just want a good score, I wanted a perfect score. I wanted a number so undeniable that even they couldn't ignore it. When the results came, I locked myself in my room to open the email. My hands were shaking. And then I saw it. A near-perfect score, a number that placed me in the top 1% of the country. I did it. I ran downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest, holding the printed sheet. It was the first time in years I had felt that spark of childish hope. Maybe they'll see this, maybe this will matter. My mother was in the living room helping Noemi, who was then 11, with a science project that my mother was obviously doing for her. "Mom, Dad, look," I said, almost breathless. I got a 1580 on the SAT. My mother didn't look up from the papier-mâché volcano. "Oh, that's nice, Aitana. Congratulations. Hey, since you're standing there, can you take out the trash? The bin is full." My father looked up from his newspaper. 1580, is that good? I guess all that time you spent locked away wasting electricity paid off. My blood ran cold. I felt a lump in my throat. Noemi, from the floor, scoffed. "Ooh, the know-it-all. Who cares about that? Are they going to give you an award or something?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, actually, they are." I turned around, crumpled the paper in my hand, and went to take out the trash. That childish hope died for good that afternoon. I dedicated myself to filling out my scholarship applications, alone on my bedroom floor. I wrote my essays about feeling invisible, about finding value in things others discard, disguising it as a lesson about antique jewelry. A few months later, the thick envelope arrived. A full scholarship tuition, room and board, and books, all paid for to the University of Michigan. It was hundreds of miles from home. It was perfect. I announced it that night at dinner. The reaction was lukewarm at best. My mother sighed. "Michigan. Wow, Aitana, that's so far away. Are you sure? Who will look after Noemi when I'm not here? She's going to miss you." Noemi, who was glued to her phone, looked up with a malicious grin. "Awesome. Her room is mine. I need more space for my TikTok videos." That was the entire conversation. No congratulations, no pride, just a sigh of inconvenience and a sister eager to take my things. In that moment, I knew I wasn't just going to college. I was leaving for good. Moving day came in the blink of an eye. I spent the summer working double shifts at the cafe, saving every penny I could. My grandma Remedios had given me a small gold necklace, one with a good weight to it. "Just in case you ever need a fresh start," she told me in secret. I wore it under my shirt. The morning I had to leave, I brought my 2 suitcases down to the living room. They held all my possessions. My parents were in the kitchen. My mother was making a special smoothie for Noemi. My father was reading the news. "Well," I said, standing in the doorway. "I'm leaving now." "Oh, right. Have a good trip, Aitana," my father said without lowering his newspaper. "Send us a postcard." My mother wiped her hands on her apron. "Be good, and call us." "Well, just call us." She didn't even offer to drive me to the bus station. The university was a 6-hour drive away. Noemi hadn't even woken up. I left the house, dragging my suitcases down the driveway. The morning sun hit my face, and I felt a mixture of terror and overwhelming relief. I was alone, completely alone. I was sitting on the curb waiting for the taxi I had called when a familiar old car turned the corner. It was my Aunt Jimena. She got out of the car with a sad smile. "You thought you were going to leave without saying goodbye to your favorite aunt?" A lump formed in my throat. She was my mother's sister, and though she was always present, she rarely intervened. She was a nervous spectator in our family's drama. "Auntie," was all I could say. "Get those bags in. Come on. I'll drive you," she said, opening the trunk. The drive was silent for the first hour. The suburban landscape turned into open highway. I stared out the window, not knowing what to say. Finally, Aunt Jimena broke the silence. Your mother, she loves you, Aitana. In her own way. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. What is her way, Auntie? Pretending I don't exist. She sighed, gripping the steering wheel. It's not that simple. When Noemi was born so fragile, something broke in your mother. She became obsessed. And you. You were so strong, so independent. You were the easy child, and she got used to not having to worry about you. So I was punished for not being a problem, I said quietly. Aunt Jimena glanced at me. It's not fair. I know. Your mother and I have talked. Well, I've tried to talk, but she doesn't listen. She looks at Noemi and only sees danger. And she looks at you. I guess she doesn't see you at all. I didn't know how to respond to that. It was the rawest truth anyone in my family had ever told me. When we got to the campus, she helped me with my bags. Before I went into the dorm, she grabbed my arm. Listen to me, Aitana, she said, her eyes serious. Don't let them define you. Don't let the way they treat you tell you what you're worth. You're smarter than all of them put together. She hugged me tightly and then discreetly slipped some crumpled bills into my jacket pocket. For your books. Don't tell your mother. I watched her drive away, and as I walked towards my new dorm room, with $100 in my pocket and my grandmother's necklace under my shirt, I made a promise to myself. I would never go back. Not until I was so successful they had to see me. Not until I was the owner of my own life, a life they couldn't touch. College was tough. I was alone. While other girls called their mothers crying over a bad exam, I had to juggle advanced classes and 2 part-time jobs to pay for food. The scholarship covered the basics, but Chicago was expensive, and the winter was brutal. I learned to be tough. I learned to depend only on myself. My family called occasionally me father to ask if I had a boyfriend yet, and my mother to give me updates on Noemi's latest health crisis. They never asked about my grades, never asked if I was okay. So I stopped expecting them to. 4 years later, I walked out of the University of Michigan with a degree in art history and a specialization in gemology. I graduated with the highest honors. No one from my family attended the ceremony. My mother said Noemi had a volleyball tournament that same weekend and really needed the support. It didn't even hurt. I just expected it. I got a job in Chicago at a mid-sized auction house. It wasn't Christie's or Sotheby's, but it was a start. My initial job was anything but glamorous. I spent my days in a dusty basement cataloging what they called the surplus lot, basically, the junk. Boxes upon boxes of costume jewelry, worthless wedding rings, broken necklaces, and scratched watches that wealthy families donated for a tax deduction. It was tedious work, but for me, it was heaven. It was a puzzle. I remembered every lesson from my Grandma Remedios, the weight, the feel, the mark. I spent 6 months in that basement. My co-workers saw me as the weird girl from the basement. That was fine. I was learning. One Tuesday afternoon, I was going through a shoebox full of brooches from the 1950s plastic, glass, cheap metal. And then I felt something. It was a small, floral design brooch, and it was filthy. At first glance, it looked just as fake as the rest. But when I picked it up, I felt the weight. It was too heavy for costume jewelry. Real gold has weight, my dear, I remembered my grandmother's voice. I cleaned it with my shirt sleeve. The dirt concealed an intricate engraving. I turned it over, and there, almost worn away by time, was the mark. A tiny mark I didn't recognize immediately. My co-workers had gone to lunch. I was alone. I ran to the office's small reference library. I searched through books of hallmarks and jeweler's marks. It took an hour, but I finally found it. It wasn't an American mark, it was French. From a small Parisian workshop in the early 1900s, a workshop that had been famous for working for minor European royalty. My heart was pounding. This wasn't a $20 brooch. I spent the next 3 days secretly using my nights and lunch breaks researching that mark. I cross-referenced, I looked through past auction archives. I wasn't wrong. It was authentic, and it was rare. I took my findings to my boss, a man named Mr. Henderson who always seemed bored. "Are you sure, AITA?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "It was in the donation box. It's probably a good imitation." "It's not, sir," I said, and I spread my research across his desk. The archives, the photos of similar pieces, the analysis of the mark. He stared at me for a long minute. Then he looked at the brooch. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. They pulled the brooch from the surplus lot and put it in the main auction for the next season. I watched it sell. The bidding started at $5,000. Then $10,000, $20,000. My hands were sweating. My boss put a hand on my shoulder. The hammer fell at $58,000. For the first time in my life, someone at my workplace saw me. Really saw me. Mr. Henderson doubled my salary the next day and moved me out of the basement. He gave me more important pieces, high-profile clients. I received my commission check for the find. It was a tiny fraction of the final price, barely $2,500. I held the check in my hand. I had generated $58,000 for the company with my knowledge, and they gave me this. It was my second great lesson. The first was from my grandmother, know the hidden value. The second was from the auction house, never let someone else keep the value you create. That night, in my tiny apartment, I opened a spreadsheet and started writing a business plan. Thank you for listening to this part of my story. If you are enjoying it, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment telling me from which city or country you are listening. Every comment helps this story reach more people. Thank you very much. And now let's continue with what happened next. I left the auction house 6 months after my big discovery. I was 24, had a few $1,000s saved, and an idea that everyone thought was crazy. You're leaving a stable job to open your own business. Doing what? My father asked on one of our rare calls. Jewelry authentication, I said. There was a silence. So, seeing if things are real. And who's going to pay you for that? Sounds like a scam, AITA. I hung up. I didn't need his approval. I rented my first office, and I used the term office very loosely. It was a storage room on the second floor of a taco restaurant in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood. The walls were saturated with the smell of grilled meat and onions. The Wi-Fi was stolen from the restaurant below and would cut out every time they turned on their industrial blender. My furniture consisted of a second-hand folding table, an office chair I found on the street that I meticulously disinfected, and one lamp. Thus, AITA Valuations was born. I started with small contracts, local antique dealers, pawn shops that needed a second opinion. I offered lower rates than the big auction houses but guaranteed a more thorough investigation. Those were brutal months. There were days I worked 16 hours and barely made enough for rent. And I made mistakes. There was one client, a slick-looking dealer, who brought me a supposed antique Cartier watch. He pressured me for a quick certificate of authenticity. I was desperate for the money, so I rushed my process. I skipped a couple of verification steps. I gave him the certificate, he paid me $500. I felt successful. 2 weeks later, a furious collector called me. He had bought the watch based on my certificate. He had taken it to Cartier. It was a very high-quality forgery, super fake. He demanded a refund. I had to pay the collector the full amount he had paid for the watch, almost $5,000. It was all the money I had in the world. I was left with $50 in my bank account. That night, I sat on the floor of that office that stank of tacos and seriously considered calling my parents. I considered begging them to let me come back. Instead, I called my grandma Remedios. I cried. I told her how stupid I had been. "And what did you learn, my child?" she asked in her calm voice. "That I can't skip steps. That desperation is a bad advisor." "No," she said. "You learned that a $5,000 mistake hurts, but you also learned how to identify a super fake. Now you know what to look for. That knowledge is worth more than $5,000. Diamonds need pressure, AITA. Keep going." I hung up the phone. The next day, I sold the small gold necklace she had given me. I used that money to pay the office rent for one more month and to place ads on collector forums. I wasn't dead, I was learning. The Cartier mistake cost me almost everything, but it gave me something invaluable, a paranoid reputation for accuracy. I became methodical, slow, infallible. I never signed another certificate unless I was 1000% sure. 6 months after that disaster, the tide began to turn. The buzz about the $58,000 brooch I had discovered at my old job was still circulating. But now, it was joined by the rumor of the girl who spotted the super fake, though people didn't know I had been the first one fooled. One day, I received an email. It was from a law firm representing a private collector, a big fish. He wanted me to authenticate a family collection before a major auction. I was terrified, but this was my chance. The collector flew me to New York. I was taken to a bank vault. There, on a black velvet table, was the collection. Necklaces, rings, tiaras. They were breathtaking. They gave me 2 weeks. I locked myself away. I barely slept. I worked with my loupe, my reference books, my UV lights. I analyzed every stone, every setting, every solder mark. The collection was mostly authentic and spectacular. But there were 2 pieces the family considered sentimental costume jewelry, an emerald necklace a previous expert had dismissed as high-quality glass, and a sapphire ring they believed was synthetic. I focused on those 2 pieces. The glass had inclusions, tiny imperfections that glass shouldn't have. They were natural inclusions typical of 19th-century Colombian mines. The sapphire, under the microscope, I saw a color zoning that was impossible to replicate in a lab from the era the ring was supposedly made. I spent 3 days just researching the origin of those 2 pieces. 2 weeks later, I presented my report. The necklace wasn't glass. They were old mine Colombian emeralds, extremely rare, valued at around $300,000. The ring wasn't synthetic, it was an unheated cashmere sapphire, easily another $250,000. The law firm was stunned. The family was euphoric. The collection went to auction. The 2 pieces I salvaged caused a bidding war. The total value of the auction surpassed $900,000. My commission, as we had agreed, was 10% of the total sale value. 3 weeks later, a check arrived at my smelly office. I looked at the number. $90,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. More money than my father had probably earned in the last 3 years. I sat on the floor of my office, the smell of tacos wafting in the air. I held the check with trembling hands and cried. They weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of relief, of validation, of knowing for the first time in my life, without a shadow of a doubt, that I had a value that I had built, that no one had given me, and that no one could take away. I had done it alone. With $90,000 in the bank, the game changed. The first thing I did was move. I rented a real office in downtown Chicago, one with windows, functional air conditioning, and most importantly, no food smell. The second thing I did was hire my first employee. Her name was Sylvia. She was a recent gemology graduate, brilliant, passionate, but quiet. She reminded me of myself. People underestimated her because she didn't make much noise. I saw her resume and saw my own story. AITA valuations, now AITA and Company. Authentications, began to grow. With the success of the New York auction, major clients started calling. Large auction houses, European collectors, wealthy families needing appraisals for their insurance. In 2 years, we opened a branch in New York, then in Miami. I stopped being the girl with the loop. I became the boss. I hired a team. I was the final word, the final I. And the funniest part of all. My family had no idea. To them, I was still the weird daughter, the failure, the one with a little job at an antique shop. And I let them believe it. It was easier. I didn't want their opinions, I didn't want their attention. My success was mine, and it was my best-kept secret. Every now and then, I had to go to the mandatory family dinners, holidays, birthdays. I would drive my very nice car, park it 2 blocks away, and walk to the house carrying my designer handbag that my mother assumed was a cheap knockoff from Chinatown. I was 28. I had just closed an authentication contract with an insurance consortium for $500,000. I flew back to Chicago and went straight to one of those dinners. I arrived, and the atmosphere was the usual, the worship of Noemi. Noemi, who was then 21, was bragging about her new, big job. She worked as a marketing coordinator at a small local company. It was amazing, Noemi said as my parents gazed at her, enraptured. The boss said the office Christmas party was a total success, and I was the one who chose the color of the napkins. How wonderful, my love, my mother cooed. You've always had an eye for detail, haven't you, Dad? Absolutely, my father said. That's my girl, succeeding. Then all eyes turned to me, as they always did, with a mixture of pity and boredom. And you, AITA? My mother asked, almost as an afterthought. Still at that little shop with old things? Something like that, Mom, I said, smiling and taking a sip of cheap wine. Still the same job. My mother nodded approvingly, as if relieved that I was still the same mediocre, uncomplicated daughter. Noemi rolled her eyes. God, AITA, you should get a life. Don't you get bored looking at junk all day? I'd go crazy. My job is so dynamic. I just smiled. Someone's got to do it. It pays the bills. That morning, paying the bills had meant a 6-figure transfer to my company's account. But to them, I was still AITA the failure. And honestly, I loved it. Their ignorance was my shield. As long as they believed I had nothing, they couldn't ask me for anything. I was on top of the world professionally. My company was the #1 reference in rare jewelry authentication. I lived in an incredible apartment in downtown Chicago, ate at the best restaurants, and traveled first class. But when I walked through the door of my parents' house, I was 12 again, invisible and unimportant. One night, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Jimena. Her voice was pure panic. AITA, you have to help. They're about to lose the house. My heart skipped a beat. What? What are you talking about? Your father, she sighed. He made some bad investments. He tried to make quick money to keep up with Noemi's expenses. She lives like she's a millionaire, with credit cards your father pays. They're drowning in debt. The bank is going to foreclose next month. I sat on my Italian leather sofa, looking at the city lights. I felt a wave of nothing. I didn't feel pity, I didn't feel anger, just a cold emptiness. And why are you calling me, Auntie? I asked. I'm the one with the little junk shop. AITA, please, she begged. I know you're doing well. Your mother doesn't know, but I do. I've seen your name in some business magazines I read at the hair salon. I know you don't have a little shop. I sighed. My shield was broken. It's your family, AITA. You can't let them end up on the street. They're my family, Auntie. Where was my family when I had to eat instant noodles for a month in college? Where were they when I almost lost my business to a scam? I know, my child, I know. I'm not asking you to forgive them. I'm just asking you not to let this happen. I hung up. I was up all night, fighting with myself. I hated what they had done to me, but the thought of them living on the street, the thought of them losing the house where, despite everything, I had grown up. I couldn't bear it. But I couldn't let them know it was me either. I didn't want their fake gratitude. I didn't want them to suddenly see me. So I found a middle ground, an anonymous solution. Through my lawyers, I created a trust, and from that trust, I started making their mortgage payments and a little extra for their expenses. $7,000 a month, every month, like clockwork. The money went into their account from a nameless corporate entity. They had no idea who it was. A few weeks later, I went to another mandatory dinner. The atmosphere was festive. My father looked relieved. My mother was radiant. "We have wonderful news," my mother announced, raising her glass. "We're saved. And it's all thanks to our incredible daughter, Noemi." I almost choked on my wine. "What?" "Yes," Noemi said, smiling with that self-satisfied air I despised so much. "My job, well, they gave me a huge bonus. You know, I'm very good at what I do. So I decided to use it to help my parents with their debts. Nothing to worry about anymore." I looked at Noemi. I looked at my parents, who were looking at her with tears of pride in their eyes. "Our golden child," my mother wept. "I always knew you were special, my love. You saved this family." No one looked at me. No one noticed I was there. Noemi, the girl who couldn't hold a job for more than 6 months, the girl whose credit card debts had caused the problem in the first place, was taking credit for the $7,000 I was sending every month. And they believed her, without a doubt. I got up from the table. "Excuse me, I have to make a call." I went to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I laughed. I laughed until my stomach hurt. It was so absurd, so perfectly ridiculous. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just pathetic. I went back out, finished my dinner, smiled, nodded, and went home to my silent empire. They could have their charade. I had my reality. This year, Thanksgiving was going to be the acid test. I was 30. Noemi was 23. 2 weeks before the dinner, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice sounded more tremulous than usual. "Aitana, darling, I don't know what I'm going to do. My back is killing me. The doctor says it's stress. Cooking for the whole family is just too much for me this year." I recognized the manipulation instantly. It was the same tone she used when she wanted me to do something so she could devote her time to Noemi. I looked at my schedule. I had a critically important virtual auction in Hong Kong the night after Thanksgiving. I was going to be up to my neck in work. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of the food," I said, knowing that if I refused, I'd be the ungrateful daughter for months. "You do that, my love. You're an angel," she said, her voice miraculously recovering. But I didn't have time to cook a turkey. So I did what I would do for a corporate event. I called the best catering service in Chicago, the same one I used for my clients. I ordered everything. The truffle-stuffed turkey, the roasted garlic mashed potatoes, the homemade cranberry sauce, not from a can, the glazed vegetables, 3 kinds of pie. The cost was probably 2 months of Noemi's salary. I didn't care. I just wanted the night to go smoothly. Of course, with my family, smoothly doesn't exist. I arrived. The food arrived in high-end thermal containers. I plated everything on my mother's porcelain dishes. The table looked spectacular. The family arrived. Aunt Jimena, my parents, and Noemi complaining about her hangover. They sat down at the table. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Wow, Aitana, Noemi said, poking the turkey with her fork. This is store-bought. You ordered takeout for Thanksgiving? I gripped my wine glass. It's from a caterer, Noemi. Mom wasn't feeling well enough to cook. Ugh, so lazy, she scoffed. You could have at least made the stuffing yourself. Store-bought stuffing is gross. This was coming from a person who once managed to burn instant soup in the microwave. My mother quickly intervened, trying to ease the tension. Well, it's different, but it looks delicious, right? At least we have food. It's spectacular, Aitana, Aunt Jimena said, trying to help. The rest of the dinner was forced politeness. Noemi talked non-stop about her challenging new job which, from what I gathered, consisted of making copies for her boss. My parents nodded in admiration. And I smiled. I smiled knowing that just that morning I had signed an authentication contract for nearly $500,000. While Noemi complained that the mashed potatoes were too creamy, I was just thinking about the Hong Kong auction. For a second, as I watched them argue about trivialities, I felt a pang of sadness. I looked at the family. I had a narcissistic sister, a passive father, and a mother who had erased me. I wished, just for an instant, that things were different. I wished I had a normal family that I wanted to buy a fancy dinner for. That small moment of weakness, that pang of longing, made what happened next 1,000 times worse. After dinner, while everyone was watching a football game in the living room, I slipped away. I'm going up to my old room, I told my mother. I need to make a quick work call. Always working, Noemi complained from the couch. Relax a little. I ignored the comment and went upstairs. My old room had barely changed, except that half of it was now filled with boxes of Noemi's old clothes. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed. I opened my laptop. The Hong Kong auction was a couple of hours away. One of my VIP clients wanted to bid on a rare Art Deco diamond necklace. My job was to give him the final green light on its authenticity and market value before he authorized a 7-figure bid. I opened my encrypted files, reviewed financial reports, valuations. I was checking the funds in my main bank account. I needed to ensure I had the liquidity to act as his proxy if communication failed. I was so engrossed in the numbers, in the screen displaying my corporate account balance, that I didn't hear the door open. Noemi didn't knock. She never did. Hey, do you have a phone charger? Mine, she started to say, but stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes, which were normally dead with boredom or bright with malice, widened like saucers. They were locked on my laptop screen. Before I could close the computer or even react, she lunged. What the hell is that? She hissed, and with a swift movement, snatched the laptop from my hands. It was so fast, I was frozen. She held the computer in front of her face. I jumped to get it back, but she dodged me with an agility I'd never seen in her. She read the number on the screen out loud, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and a raw, naked greed I had never heard before. $12,458,000. She looked at me. Her face was pale, and then that pallor transformed into an expression of savage triumph. You, she screamed, you liar. And then, without giving me time to say a word, she ran towards the stairs, holding my laptop like a hunting trophy. Dad! Mom! Get up here, right now. Aitana is rich. The scream echoed through the house. The sound of the football game stopped abruptly. I heard chairs scraping against the wooden floor. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. It was over. My shield, my secret. It was all over. I heard my parents' footsteps running up the stairs. They reached the landing, out of breath, with Aunt Jimena behind them, looking confused. What is it, Noemi? What's all the screaming? My father said. Noemi stood at the top of the stairs, holding my laptop open with the screen facing them. Her hand was shaking. "Look," she shrieked. "Just look at this. Our poor little sister. The one from the little shop. My parents moved closer to the screen. I saw their faces go from confusion to shock. My mother put a hand to her mouth. My father turned pale. Silence. A thick, sepulchral silence that lasted an eternity. I was standing in the doorway of my room, motionless. My mother was the first to speak. Her voice was a trembling whisper, but her eyes were not proud, they were calculating. "Aitana, sweetie, what is this?" she said, approaching me as if she were approaching a wild animal. "Why? Why didn't you tell us?" Before I could answer, Noemi let out a harsh laugh. "Why? Because she's selfish. That's what she is. She has $12 million hidden away while this family is struggling. While I'm drowning in student debt." "Noemi, you didn't even finish college," I snapped. "It doesn't matter," she screamed, her face red with fury. "You owe me. You've had it easy your whole life with your good grades and your scholarships. While I had to struggle. I want my share." My father finally reacted. His normally passive face was like stone. "Noemi is right. How could you hide this from us, Aitana? We are your family." "My family," I repeated, and the ice in my own voice surprised me. "Yes," Noemi chimed in. "And I deserve a fair start. I want $2 million. It's nothing to you. I just want what I deserve to start my own life." I looked from one to the other, incredulous. There was no, "Congratulations." There was no, "How did you do it?" Just outstretched hands. And then my mother nodded. She nodded slowly, with a calculating look that chilled me to the bone. "Your sister is right," she said softly. "And your father and I aren't getting any younger, Aitana. We've worked so hard. We deserve to rest. We've been looking at a little house in Florida, a place for the whole family to gather. About $3 million, nothing extravagant." She looked at me, and her voice hardened, losing all its fake sweetness. "It's your obligation as a daughter. You owe us, after everything we've done for you." I stood there, staring at the three of them. 3 vultures, circling. And then I started to laugh. It wasn't a small laugh, it was a bitter, deep cackle that came from the bottom of my soul. I laughed so hard Aunt Jimena took a step back. "Obligation?" I said, wiping a tear of laughter from my eye. "You want to talk to me about obligations?" I looked at Noemi. "You want $2 million? The same girl who couldn't even pay me back the $20 I loaned her last week." I looked at my parents. "And you want $3 million? After letting your golden child take the credit for saving this house?" The silence returned. "Speaking of money," I said, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "That $7,000 a month that Noemi has supposedly been giving you to pay your debts. That was me. Every single cent. For the last 2 years." I watched the blood drain from their faces. Noemi's mouth opened and closed like a fish. My mother looked like she was going to faint. I slowly walked over to Noemi and took my laptop from her hands. She was so stunned she didn't resist. I picked up my purse, the one my mother had called a cheap knockoff. "It's over," I said, walking towards the stairs. "The help, the money, all of it. You will never see another cent from me." I walked past them. My mother tried to grab my arm. "Aitana, wait. You can't." I shook off her grip. "Watch me." I walked down the stairs, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cold November night. For the first time in 30 years, I felt completely free. I walked out of that house and didn't even look back. I got in my car, the one I had parked 2 blocks away, and drove back to my apartment in Chicago. I hadn't been on the road for 10 minutes when my phone started exploding. It was my mother, then my father, then Noemi, then unknown numbers I assumed were distant relatives. Noemi had already called to tell her distorted version of the story. I silenced my phone, but the message previews kept popping up on my lock screen. 7:42 p.m. Mom, how could you do this to us? We are your family. We raised you. 8:15 p.m. Dad, let's be reasonable. Let's talk like adults. Family comes first. 9:30 p.m. Noemi, you are a selfish bee. You have all that money and you treat us like this. 11 p.m. Mom, I found a perfect house in Florida. Only 3.1 million. We can negotiate. I turned it off. The last straw was Noemi's Facebook post around 2 a.m. A blurry photo of herself crying with a long, dramatic caption. I can't believe the betrayal. My sister, who I have always supported, turns out to be a secret multimillionaire. For years she has let our parents struggle, let me drown in debt while she lived a life of luxury. Nobody can believe this level of selfishness. Money really does corrupt people. Hundreds of likes. Comments from distant aunts and cousins I hadn't seen in a decade. Unbelievable, Aitana. You were always the weird one. If I had that money, I would help my family, not abandon them. How ungrateful. Your parents gave you everything. I let out a cold laugh. Gave me everything. They gave me a lifetime of indifference. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't answer their messages. I knew the silence would drive them crazy. And I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, Monday morning, they showed up at my office. My assistant, Sylvia, burst into my private office, pale as a ghost. Aitana, your mother, your father, and your sister are in reception. They say they have an appointment. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. And I assume they don't, right? Sylvia swallowed hard. No. They're arguing with the security guard. I stood up, smoothed my skirt. It's fine. I'll handle it. I walked out to my office lobby, a spacious area with marble floors and a view of the river. There they were. They looked so out of place. My father sitting rigidly. Noemi with her arms crossed and a look of smug defiance. And my mother, her eyes red, ready to cry at the slightest provocation. Aitana, we need to talk, my father said in a low voice, trying to sound authoritative. No, we have nothing to talk about, I said, my voice echoing in the silent lobby. Several of my employees were discreetly watching from their desks. Of course we do. Noemi jumped in. Do you seriously think you can just refuse to help your family? You live in this luxury while we suffer. I crossed my arms. You don't seem to be suffering much with that new Gucci bag, Noemi. Noemi's face turned red. It was a new bag I knew she couldn't afford. My mother took the opportunity to burst into calculated tears. Aitana, you owe us this. We raised you, we gave you a roof over your head, we fed you. How can you abandon us like this? We sacrificed so much for you. I looked at them without emotion. I don't owe anyone anything. I built this myself. When I needed you, where were you? Oh, right. Busy ignoring me. You are a heartless wretch, Noemi screamed. No, I said. I'm a businesswoman. I took out my phone, opened my banking app, found the recurring $7,000 transfer, the one still scheduled for the first of the next month, and right in front of their eyes, I pressed, cancel all future payments. My mother's phone, which was linked to the account, pinged with the cancellation notification. My mother let out a shriek I didn't know she was capable of. You can't. You can't do this to us. I just did, I said. My father's face turned a purplish red. You're going to regret this, young lady. We are family. I motioned to the security guard. Please escort these people out of the building. And put their names on the "Do Not Admit" list. Permanently. Noemi started screaming insults. My mother collapsed into a hysterical sob. My father was pointing at me, threatening me. They were dragged out of my company, in front of my employees and a couple of clients who had just arrived. And I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sadness. Just relief. That night, as I was in my apartment reviewing the final reports from the Hong Kong auction, which had been a resounding success, my personal phone rang. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized it. I answered. "Grandma," I said. There was a pause, and then my Grandma Remediosa's dry laugh. "Well done, my girl," she said, her voice filled with a pride I had never heard from my parents. You're not mad at me?" I asked quietly. "Mad? I'm proud. You're the first one in that family of cowards to stand up for herself. I only wish one thing." "What's that?" "I wish I had been there," she laughed. "I would have loved to see their faces when they got thrown out of your office." I laughed for the first time in days. A real, light laugh. "Thank you, Grandma." "Don't thank me. You earned it. Every penny and every second of your freedom. Don't let them ever take it away from you again." I hung up. The following week, I moved. My old apartment was too easy to find. I rented a penthouse in the most secure part of Chicago with 24/7 security and a guest registry as strict as the White House's. I changed my phone number, updated my company information, erased all my personal data from any social network. I became a ghost. But they still tried. My mother started sending me emails from new addresses. A new manipulative subject line every day. "I am very sick. Do you really not care? Family is still family, Aitana. You will regret it if you let me die without saying goodbye." Noemi, on the other hand, tried to build her own career. That was the most comical part of it all. One day, Sylvia, my assistant, came into my office, her eyes wide. "Aitana, you're not going to believe this." She put an article in front of me. It was about a new jewelry authentication business. The name, Fine Jewels by my last name. I burst out laughing. Noemi, the person who couldn't tell a diamond from a cubic zirconia, was trying to open an authentication company using my last name for credibility. I clicked on her website. Less than 3 months after its launch, it was flooded with 1-star reviews. She told me my engagement ring was fake, and it was my grandmother's. Almost ruined my marriage. Terrible service. The staff has no idea what they're doing. A total scam. This company is a joke. I wasn't surprised. Noemi had never taken anything seriously in her life. She thought she could walk into this world with just a last name, but this industry is not for frauds. A year after cutting all contact, I was sitting on the balcony of my penthouse. It was a summer evening, a glass of wine in my hand, looking out at the dazzling Chicago skyline. My phone was silent. I no longer feared it ringing. I no longer checked my email with dread, expecting another request for money or a new drama. I no longer felt the pressure to prove anything. I had won. But not in the way they thought. My real victory wasn't the 12 million in the bank. It wasn't owning the most successful company in my field. My victory was the silence. My victory was the fact that my phone didn't ring. My victory was freedom, the freedom to live my life on my own terms, without being controlled, manipulated, or ignored by anyone. I was free in a way my family, with their petty, desperate greed, would never understand. They still send emails, saying that family is family and asking for forgiveness. But how do you forgive someone who only saw you when you had money? Was I wrong to cut all ties with them? Thank you for listening to my story. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. And if you like real and emotional stories about family and life, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot. See you in the next story.